In 1432, Bertrandin de la Brocquière was sent off on an extraordinary journey across the Ottoman Empire. He left behind a detailed book containing his observations on the politics and customs of the places he visited. Strangely though, Bertrandin wasn't a diplomat, and he took an indirect and dangerous route home across the Ottoman territories, which raises the question, was Bertrandin a medieval secret agent? Life was simpler back in the medieval period. Although you might get struck down by a tooth infection, at least you didn't have to worry about accidentally drunk dialing your ex or finding out that your phone number, address, and other personal data was being sold to people to make a profit out of you. Life is more complicated, but it doesn't need to be. I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Aura, for helping make our lives that bit easier by providing an all-in-one service to help keep you safe online. If you've ever been bored and tried Googling yourself, you might have seen your personal information on a public site being sold by data brokers. We don't all have the time to track down every time that happens, but Aura can help by sending requests to make the brokers remove your information. For one affordable price, Aura offers parental controls, password management, data protection, and more. It's made my life so much easier as I don't have to worry about scammers getting hold of my details or those annoying robotic calls. You can try out yourself for 2 weeks by using my link aura.com/medievalmadness or by clicking the link in the description. And now for today's video, welcome to Medieval Madness. Bertrandin de la Brocquière. The 15th century was a time of great change when the Middle Ages were about to blossom into the early modern era. Some of the artists that were helping to shape culture in the West included huge names like Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Van Eyck. Economic and social changes were also taking place due to the influence of families like the Medicis in Florence. It was the perfect time for a young and devout man like Bertrandin to make his mark in the world and go off on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Bertrandin was born around the turn of the 15th century in the Duchy of Aquitaine, France. Little is known of his life before 1421, although he was probably born into a minor noble family. When he was about 21 years old, he was made an esquire by Philip III, Duke of Burgundy, known as the Good. After completing a few missions for the Duke, Bertrandin was awarded the title First Esquire in 1423. It was only after years of building up a high level of trust with Bertrandin that Philip the Good asked him to go on a special journey. His mission? To deliver a letter to the Duke of Lithuania. At least that was the official version. On the Duke's Secret Service. In February of 1432, Bertrandin left Ghent, taking a route through Champagne and Burgundy to finally arrive in Rome, Italy, where he was received by Pope Eugene IV. Next, on March the 25th, travelling as a pilgrim, he set out for Venice and the galley that would take him across the sea from Rhodes to Cyprus, and then on to Jaffa and the Holy Land. On his return, Bertrandin wrote a book about his adventures in the East called Le Voyage d'Outre-mer, or The Overseas Journey, in which Bertrandin recorded meticulous details about the people, the culture, and most importantly about the military forces that he experienced on his travels. He wrote little of the Italy that he passed through on his way to the ship, or of his voyage, which he shared with many other pilgrims, several of them fellow Burgundians. Bertrandin described his arrival at Jaffa, where the officers of the Sultan of Egypt requested their usual tribute from the pilgrims, a fee that had to be paid for safe passage. Quote, "When any pilgrim disembarked there, interpreters and other officers of the Sultan instantly hastened to ascertain their numbers, to serve them as guides, and to receive in the name of their master the customary tribute. It took 2 days for him to reach Jerusalem, all the while acting as just a regular pilgrim, and after a short stay, his group moved on to the town of Gaza to begin preparing for their arduous trek across the desert. They were to visit St. Catherine's Monastery on Mount Sinai, which was already 9 centuries old at that time. But Bertrandin wrote that, quote, "At the end of the second day's journey, I was seized by such a burning fever that it was impossible for me to proceed further. My 4 companions, distressed at this accident, made me mount an ass and recommended me to one of our Arabs, whom they charged to reconduct me if possible to Gaza. Bertrandin was nursed by this man who he said, quote, took a great deal of care of him, which as a Christian he found unusual. After returning to Jerusalem, Bertrandin joined his comrades once again, but was not in a state to depart until the 19th of August. Caravan Royale. It was then that Bertrandon made a strange decision. Instead of taking a boat home, Bertrandon decided to make his way back to Burgundy via land via Beirut and Damascus. He also chose to keep this project secret for some time. Of course, it was only a strange and dangerous decision if you really were a Western pilgrim. If, however, you were a Burgundian spy who was trying to find out as much information as possible about your enemy, then it was a fantastic ploy. He took a ship from Jaffa to Beirut and then travelled with a mule team to Damascus in Syria, where he met Jacques Coeur, a French merchant who was one of the most celebrated merchants who ever existed, and worked for the French King Charles VII. At the convent of Our Lady at Saidnaya in Damascus, Bertrandon experienced seeing an image of the Virgin which was said to sweat a healing oil into a vase placed beneath it. He described this as a mere trick to get money, but noted that both Saracen and Christian were faithful to the image. Bertrandon returned to Beirut and noticed that Jaffa, which was once strong, was now only a few tents covered with reeds meant for pilgrims to shelter, and that in Acre its houses are not more than 300 in number. While in Damascus, Bertrandon negotiated with the leader of a caravan that was travelling from Mecca to Bursa, and he was permitted to join as long as he wore Turkish clothing. Journeying as a Westerner would not only endanger himself, but also compromise his fellow travellers. He said, quote, "The caravan was composed of Moors, Turks, Barbaresques, Tartars, and Persians." On the journey, Bertrandon befriended a Mameluke named Hayal-Dola. Mamelukes were enslaved mercenaries who served the Ottoman Empire. Hayal-Dola was Bulgarian by birth and taught Bertrandon many interesting things about the culture of Islam and Muhammad and Mecca, as well as the military customs and some basics of the language. Bertrandon recalled that, quote, "On our arrival, the first day's journey at Balek, I drew out my paper to know how to ask for barley and chopped straw, which I wanted to give my horse. 10 or 12 Turks near me, observing my action, burst into laughter, and coming nearer to examine my paper, seemed as much surprised at our writing as we are with theirs. They took a liking to me and made every effort to teach me to speak Turkish. They were never weary of making me often repeat the same thing and pronounced it so many different ways that I could not fail to retain it. So when we separated, I knew how to call for everything necessary for myself and horse." Hayal-Dola also explained to Bertrandon why 2 of the young people travelling with the caravan were blind. He said that once the Muslim pilgrims saw the shrine of Muhammad at Medina, some of them, quote, "had their eyes thrust out, because they said after what they had seen, the world could no longer offer them anything worth looking at." From Burgundy with Love. The caravan passed by Antioch, traversed Little Armenia, and arrived on the Mediterranean coast at Alexandretta in Turkey, crossing Asia Minor, then known as Anatolia, at a good pace. In Iconium, Bertrandon left the caravan and joined a delegation of men who were going to see the Beylik of Karaman, who was the chief of the powerful Karamanid dynasty. At one point, Bertrandon's cover was nearly blown when a Turkish slave heard him speak the language very incorrectly and accused him of being a spy who had come to make remarks on this country. On Bertrandon admitting to being French, the slave said, quote, "If you were not a spy, would you not have embarked and returned home by sea?" Bertrandon was only able to defuse the situation by saying that he was afraid to venture by sea because the Venetians and the Genoese were in the middle of a bitter war. Once he had arrived in Bursa, Bertrandon lodged at the house of a Florentine for 10 days before joining some European merchants from Italy and Spain, and going on to Pyrrha and then Constantinople. Whilst there, he wrote about the handsome churches, including Hagia Sophia, and of the Greeks' way of worshipping. He saw the emperor's daughter there, who described him as handsome and fair, although he was shocked when she, quote, "bestrode her horse like a man." He also attended a marriage feast and a tournament. Politically, he also noted that the Byzantine Emperor John VIII seemed weak and was under the power of the Ottoman Sultan and the rising Ottoman Empire. The Man with the Golden Ducats. Bertrandon left Constantinople on the 23rd of January 1433, accompanied by Benedict Folco of Forli, the ambassador of Filippo Maria Visconti, Duke of Milan. They proceeded to the court of the Ottoman Sultan Murad II in Adrianople, where, on arrival at the palace in February, Ambassador Forli was given a sumptuous reception alongside other dignitaries from Greece and Bosnia. Bertrandon, who was also in attendance, noticed that the Sultan's revenues were 2,500,000 ducats. He loved hunting and hawking and had upwards of 1,000 hounds and 2,000 hawks, and loved liquor and those who drank hard. He also, quote, loved women and had a taste for boys, having 300 of the former and about 30 of the latter, which he preferred. Leaving Adrianople in March, Bertrandin and Benedict went on to Macedonia, Bulgaria, Albania, and Bosnia. They met one of the last medieval rulers of Serbia, the despot George Brankovic, when arriving in Belgrade on the 12th of April. Whilst there, Bertrandin turned his attention to how the Ottoman Empire could be conquered. He considered the Turkish armor, military system, and style of fighting, writing that it, quote, varies according to circumstances. When they find a favorable opportunity for it, they divide themselves into different troops and thus attack many parts of an army at once. This mode is particularly used when they are among woods and mountains, from the great facility they have of uniting together again. At other times, they form ambuscades and send out scouts well mounted to observe the enemy. If their report be that he is not on his guard, they instantly form their plan and take advantage of the circumstance. The Spy Who Came Home. Bertrandin came up with a plan to unite France, England, and Germany against the Turks, believing conquest could be easy if together the three countries selected, quote, men-at-arms, archers, and crossbows in as great numbers as possible. From France, 1,000 men-at-arms and 10,000 archers from England, and from Germany, the greatest number possible of gentlemen with their crossbowmen on horse and foot. He thought that Sultan Murad did have the resources to conquer Europe, but the West was better armed. After crossing the Great Hungarian Plain, the two travellers parted ways in the capital city of Buda. From there, it took Bertrandin 5 days to reach Vienna, where he was received by Duke Albert V of Austria, a cousin to his master Philip the Good. From there, he journeyed through Bavaria to attend a meeting at the Council of Basel in Switzerland held by the Catholic Church. One of the subjects being discussed there was the fact that the Byzantine Emperor John VIII was willing to ally himself with the Catholics in the face of a growing threat from the Ottoman Turks. Bertrandin finally arrived home in Burgundy in early July 1433 and reported to Philip the Good at the Abbey of Poitiers. He presented the Duke with a copy of the Quran and the Life of Muhammad, which had both been translated into Latin by a chaplain of the Venetian consul at Damascus. He also gave his master some Turkish robes and his horse that had been bought while in the East. In 1322, Bertrandin married the richest heiress of Artois, an arrangement made by Philip the Good, and in 1443, Bertrandin became captain of Castle Ruppelmonde in modern-day Belgium. He died at Lille in May 1459. The truth of Bertrandin's real mission to the Ottoman Empire is a mystery. The journey was very risky and the cost must have been very high. Could the expedition have been financed by others as well as Philip the Good? After all, Bertrandin seems to have been received well everywhere for just a lowly messenger. The account of his travels, written in French for Philip, who had plans for a new crusade to the Holy Land, is an invaluable source of information on the Near East during the late medieval period. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you're enjoying these videos. I'll see you next week for another one. Hope you have a great week. Cheers!